Back and forth continues. So now what? Will the removal of the blockade spark more protests? And was this a success for Mr. Trudeau's strategy or a sign of failure? Let's get some answers. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair joins me from just outside the House of Commons on Parliament Hill. Minister Blair, always good to talk to you. The OPP moved into the Tyendinaga territory around Belleville. First of all, your reaction to the fact that there were arrests, and what do you think happens now?
Well, the police are doing their job, and I know their training and their procedures. They will always endeavor to do that as peaceably as possible with the minimum amount of use of force. We don't in any way instruct or interfere with that, but the police are doing the job that the law requires them to do, and they're upholding the injunction that's in place. And at the same time, we are encouraging everyone who is on those barricades and engaged in that process to take the barricades down, to allow the train service to resume. And we want those who are want to engage with us in dialogue. We're here waiting to resume that dialogue after the barricades come down.
The question will be, should the police have done this earlier? Should the OPP have moved in to avoid the economic pain caused by the blockade?
Well, and I think the real question is that all of us want to see this resolved as peaceably as possible. And so that has been our intent over all of the discussions related to this. And I also know that that's the intent of the police, that they would like to see if this can be resolved as peaceably and non-confrontationally as possible. But at the same time, as time dragged on and as the impact of these barricades and the disruption of service was so keenly felt by Canadians right across the country, then there was an urgency to the resumption of that service. It's why the Prime Minister said take down and urge the people that were on those barricades to take those barricades down. And I believe it's also why the police made their operational decision to enforce the injunction at this time.
Sorry, why did they do it? Are you saying they heard the Prime Minister and they took a signal from the PM?
No, that is not what I've said. Actually, I believe they have heard from Canadians about the impact that these barricades and disruption of service is having on them. The police have a jurisdictional responsibility here. They are now doing the job that society and the law entrusts of them, and from all accounts, and in my observation, they appear to be doing it very carefully.
Mr. Blair, but is it an indictment of this dialogue strategy? Everybody wanted this resolved peacefully, but the opposition, Andrew Scheer, said what the government showed was a weakness. Dialogue, no fundamental process, waiting for the police to act, that this is an indictment of the strategy after almost 3 weeks. What's your response to that?
First of all, Mr. Scheer's comments have not been respectful or reflective of the law. And I will tell you, Evan, I've actually been on those barricades myself in a previous job in a different capacity. It's not weakness to work tirelessly to resolve it peaceably. It's not weakness to engage in meaningful dialogue and to endeavor to, in every possible way, to resolve that peaceably. And that effort has been made by all of us involved in this. I think sometimes Mr. Scheer's comments reflect a lack of understanding of the law and who has jurisdictional responsibility here.
But
the government of Canada has worked very hard to address the underlying concerns raised by Indigenous leadership, and it is the police, independent of any order of government, who have the job of upholding the law and enforcing the injunctions.
But his contention, and I think it's a legitimate question here, Minister Blair, does this reaction by the government to wait almost 3 weeks and wait for the police to make the decision, does it send a signal to other protesters on other projects who may say, you know what, this is great, we can use blockades, the government's not going to do very much, they're going to talk to us, capitulate to our demands, so now you've given license to other blockades. What do you say to that?
And I disagree completely, Evan, and I recall on very many occasions in dealing with people who were engaged in lawful, peaceful protest, and by the way, that's the law in Canada, that people can do that. And we have always worked to negotiate a peaceful resolution to those protests, but in these circumstances, the harm that was being felt by Canadians across the country could not be sustained and was unacceptable, untenable. And that's why the Prime Minister took a very strong position and did not direct the police, but rather directed the protesters to stand down, to remove those barricades, to allow for a resumption of service, and to come back to the table to the important work. And I will tell you, it's not reconciliation, and a commitment to reconciliation is not a weakness, it's a strength, and it's a strength of this government that we are committed to that dialogue and to that agenda.
To be fair, I spoke to some of the Tyndonega Mohawks today, and they were unhappy. They believe the arrests have destroyed the reconciliation agenda. What do you say, though, to the RCMP? They're meeting with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs right now. That's another situation. What details can you give as talks continue there?
Well, and can I tell you, I have great confidence in the work of the RCMP and the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner in British Columbia. They've been working very closely with the officials from the BC government, and they have also been meeting with the Wet'suwet'en leadership, both hereditary and the band councils, for months. And they have worked tirelessly to resolve the issue and to enforce an injunction there in the most peaceable way possible. The RCMP continues to work very well in that community to be respectful, but also to ensure that the law is upheld. They're doing their job, and I have a lot of confidence in them. Right. And I think Canadians should. I would encourage Canadians, look carefully at what their police services are actually doing. They're upholding the law in this country. They're providing the services to serve and protect the people of this country and to uphold the rule of law.
Minister, the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs are telling us and others that there's, in fact, still RCMP officers on their land, that they've moved their presence, pardon me, but they're still harassing them, and they've got a trust problem. So what do you say to that? And
let me be very clear. I've heard some people suggest that there should be places in Canada where we would abandon the police services. The rule of law has to be maintained in every place in Canada. The rule of law is underpinned by the work of an independent police service guided by that law. And we're not going to abandon the thousands of people who live in any part of Canada who rely on police services, the service and the protection that the police provide. And so if anyone suggests that there will be no policing in any part of Canada, I very respectfully disagree, but that is not an area that I think Canadians are prepared to compromise.
Well, okay, but that's going to be challenged by some Indigenous leaders. Last question. I mean, it would be obvious your government must be prepared for more protest. There's protests going on as you and I are speaking right now. There's protests that are going to be planned for the TMX pipeline. What will your government do when there are more protests, maybe even more blockades? What's the plan?
Well, I will tell you, in our country and under our Constitution, lawful peaceful protest is a hallmark of our democracy, and Canadians have the right to do that.
But blockades, but blockades are not are those legal?
And no, they are not. And that's why the courts have issued an injunction. The injunction instructs those who are blockading those rails to leave those blockades and to allow for resumption of service. And the injunction also gives an authority, a legal authority, and empowers the police to take action in those cases. And they're doing their job. And so what I would hope that we would see is people could engage in lawful, peaceful protest. But that protest should not extend to harming other innocent Canadians, to deprive them of their services and their opportunity to support themselves and their families. And so I would ask very, very much that protest, which is quite permissible in this country, should be done in a way which is respectful of all Canadians.
Got to leave it there. Minister Bill Blair, I appreciate you joining us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Evan.